right here on the YouTube.
Yeah.
I don't think that's Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to go.
Looks like we got the thumbs up. We are good to go.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. Welcome to the July 13th, 2023 meeting, special public meeting of the McMinnville Water and Light Commission. Time is 3 p.m. and I'll call the meeting to order and ask that our clerk do a roll call
Yes, Mayor Drapkin.
here.
Commissioner Tankersley is excused this afternoon. Commissioner Gormley,
Here.
Commissioner Christensen,
Here.
Commissioner Tate.
Here. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, before we get started, I just want to tell you that I went out and saw Tom this afternoon around 1 o'clock. And so just to tell you all hi, and he's doing fine. Spirits are good, but he's got to stay there for a while. So
Yeah, wonderful. I'm glad you went to see him. Thank you. You'll see the first item. We had a little feedback. Is that resolved?
Mark needs to put himself on mute.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to start with a public hearing. We were then going to go into executive session. We're not going to do that today. You have a document in front of you that would be distributed in executive session. It's marked confidential. That's for you to review while we're here in the meeting, and then return to legal counsel before you leave, please. So we are now going to hold our scheduled public hearing on McMinnville electric rates and charges. As mayor and presiding officer, will conduct the hearings, impose reasonable time limits on participants, and receive documents and reports into the hearing record. You will notice that you have a letter of submission here from Mark Davis that will be added to the packet. But that's printed out as well for you to review in terms of public comment. Today's hearing, we're going to begin with a staff report. Commissioners will have an opportunity to ask questions of staff during that time. After the staff report, interested parties will be invited to ask questions. For those who are submitting any testimony, we'll ask you to please state your name and address for the record. Because we're operating in a hybrid digital format on Zoom, I'm going to provide a little additional information on procedural items. If you are watching on YouTube and you'd like to participate in the public hearing, we'll need you to go to the Zoom meetings, and those have been provided in the published notices, and they are on our current website, and you can join the meeting from our website. Anyone joining the Zoom meeting is automatically set to be on mute and to have their video display hidden. At the appropriate times during the meeting, I will ask those on Zoom whether they'd like to speak. If you would like to speak when the time is appropriate, please use the raise your hand feature, and our either our clerk or our IT manager will unmute you. Let's see. Each person will receive adequate time to ask questions of staff and submit testimony. If you have any difficulty using the raise your hand feature, you may also use the chat feature and send a recording directly to our clerk. If you are calling in via phone and do not have access to the Zoom meeting, or then please wait until I ask if there is anyone on the phone who would like to ask a question. I will make sure that everyone who wants to participate in the public hearing has the opportunity to do so. After the staff report, the commission anticipates accepting materials into the hearing record and continuing the hearing to a later date. For additional comments of interested parties for a final staff report, deliberations of the final staff report, continued deliberations of the commission, and adoption of new rates and schedules. So I understand that our utility rate analyst, Ms. Trina McManus, will begin the staff presentation and introduce our rate consultant.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. In January of 2023, McMinnville Water and Light contracted with Utility Financial Solutions to conduct an electric cost of service study. McMinnville Water and Light has typically aligned electric cost of service updates with BPA rate cases, which occur every 2 years. A new BPA rate case will go into effect this year on October 1st, 2023. Staff has been working closely with UFS over the last 6 months to provide data for the cost of service model and give feedback. Mr. Mark Boshaw, President of Utility Financial Solutions, is here with us this afternoon via Zoom and is prepared to share the results of the cost of service analysis with the Commission. Mark, I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Let's turn this on. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you about the electric cost of service results. I'm going to go ahead now and share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what I want to talk about tonight is I got 3 things listed. There's really 4 things I want to talk about. One is the long-term financial projection that we've done for McMinnville Water and Light Electric Department and the cost of service study results. And then we have a proposed rate design that we're looking for.
Oh, wait a
input.
second.
Ask you to pause. We lost our audio.
So there you go. You're trying to increase the, there we go. That
Yeah,
button.
you muted.
Is that better?
Yeah,
Oh, my
Mark, do you mind
Screaming.
taking it from the top?
Sure. Yeah, no problem. Again, thank you for the opportunity to present the results of the electric cost of service study. What I want to review today is the 3 main areas, but there's actually a 4th area I want to discuss. One is to look at a long-term financial projection. I will say this, I mean, McMinnville Water and Light is a very financially stable utility. And because of the way you get power supply through BPA, over the course of the past year and a half around the country, they've seen substantial increases in electric rates. There's been some out in like the Northeast, their electric rates increased anywhere from 30 to 50%. That's because of the price of fuel, but because of BPA, you're kind of insulated from a lot of that. Not totally, but what you're going to see is a very financially stable utility. And of course, our objective is to keep you that way. And so we're proposing small, modest rate adjustments, about 2.78%, I believe, over the next 2 years to keep the cash reserves relatively stable. Then I want to look at the cost of service study results. And what you're going to see is for the major rate classes, the study results are very consistent with what was done 2 years ago. And there's no major rate changes in those major rate classes that are needed. They're pretty much getting something close to the average adjustment. There are a couple very small rate classes that are out of alignment. They've been out of alignment for several years, and we're giving them a little bit higher of an increase. We put an upper boundary on our increase at 5%. All right, so these small classes that are out of line with cost of service, we gave them about a 2% additional adjustment. So, and we're looking for input from the board on our rate design. The 4th item is you're governed, or you're what's called a PURPA qualifying utility because you sell greater than 500 million kilowatt hours a year. And because of that, there's certain things that we have to consider based on legislation that was passed in 2021 related to demand side management programs. And I want to discuss that to try to meet the criteria that we have to meet for PURPA, which is basically to discuss it with the board. And the board needs to consider certain demand side management programs. And I'll get to that. That's at the end of my presentation. So when we look at your long-term financial projection, we look at three key financial targets. One is debt coverage ratio, and you're a debt-free utility, so debt coverage is not an issue for you. We look at what your minimum level of cash reserve should be. And then what you're going to see in our proposed rate track is we're trying to keep the cash reserves relatively stable. You have some very heavy capital improvement programs projected over the next 5 years. And so the cash reserves, even with the adjustments, you'll see they're declining, but we're still in financially sound at the end of the 5-year projection. Now, we also do what's called a targeted operating income. What that is it becomes our upper boundary. In other words, we don't like to exceed that, because if we do, we're actually overcharging customers. What that target operating income reflects is the inflationary increase in the replacement cost of assets. So, for example, if you put $1 million asset in service with a 20-year life, and if you only recover depreciation expense, at the end of that 20 years, you've recovered $1 million. But when you go to replace it, it's going to cost you more than that, because every year the replacement cost of the assets go up. So that target operating income reflects the break-even point, in a sense, the inflationary increase in the assets replacement cost. And so we try to stay between those boundaries. We look at the debt coverage ratio, the minimum cash reserves, we have to exceed those. And the upper boundary becomes a targeted operating income. So when it comes to the minimum cash, there are certain things that influence how much cash the utility needs to maintain in reserves. And it's usually driven by what's called working capital lag. And what that is the timing difference between when you pay a bill and get money from customers. So, for example, you may go all through the month of January paying for labor, materials, supplies. At the end of the month, you may read all the meters and send bills out the first week of February. You don't get that money until the middle of March. So there's that timing difference. So we look at the timing differences, the cash that you need in reserves to buffer that working capital lag. We also want to make sure that you have the money in reserves to fund your capital improvement program. And also, there's always unexpected events that occur. You know, if you're in Florida, it could be a hurricane, it could be an ice storm, a windstorm. And so we want to make sure that you have enough cash in reserves, that if an unexpected event occurs, that you have the money to either repair that asset or to start the repair and replacement process if it's a major catastrophic event. So we look at these different factors to quantify the minimum level of cash that you need. And then we want to make sure you stay above that. So this is your actual calculation of the minimum cash reserve level.
Mark, before you move on, our general manager would like to add some comments to the last slide.
Sure.
So Mark, one of the questions I have for you on this slide is, and you brought it up earlier, we are a BPA customer and we do have significant risk in our BPA contract. And that risk is what they call the cost recovery adjustment clause. So have you looked at that and what that may do to our minimum cash or our to keep that? We may have to have higher cash reserves because of that issue.
That's correct. We didn't look at that specifically. We did quantify for purchase power adjustments about $3 million in cash reserves, and that represents your maximum monthly purchase power cost that we're keeping in reserves. But we did not directly quantify that amount, and it should be considered, especially if historically they have implemented that cost adjustment mechanism.
They have in the past, and so that's why I brought it up.
That's
They have in the past.
Yes. it's something that can trigger any time in our contract if BPA is not meeting its financial reserves policy.
Okay. We
Yeah.
should probably quantify that in future studies. I don't think it's going to change our recommendations for today because your cash reserves are above the minimums,
Right.
almost twice the minimums. So I'm not real concerned with it right now, but it is something that we should quantify in the future. Now, when we looked at this minimum, right now we're calculating it to be about 20 million. And your cash reserves are projected almost $40 million in 2024. But because of the capital improvement program, your cash reserves are projected to drop almost $10 million over this next 5 years. And of course, even with that, we're still above that minimum cash reserve level. So, and that's with the rate adjustments or the rate tracks that we projected. Is there any questions about this? Oh, there is one other thing I want to mention. The age of your infrastructure, the average system around the United States is about 50% depreciated. Your plant or infrastructure is about 44% depreciated. What that means is you have a newer infrastructure than most other utilities, which in our opinion, when you have newer infrastructure, it's able to hold up better against ice storms or windstorms, and you'll have less unexpected events occurring. So what that means is you've consistently reinvested in the system, and you can see that because you have relatively new infrastructure. Okay. Is there any questions on this calculation?
Not seeing any, thank you.
Right. Now, that target operating income, as I mentioned, is the upper boundary that we look at, and it represents what we call the inflationary increase in assets replacement cost. You know, sometimes it sounds kind of funny when I say that. Even though we're a non-for-profit utility, we have to make money to break even. And the reason we have to make money to break even is because the replacement cost of assets consistently increases or rises. So to break even, we need to recover that inflationary increase in the future replacement of the assets. So your rate of return, like if you were an investor-owned utility, your rate of return would probably be somewhere between 9 and 11%. But because you're a non-for-profit, that break-even point is about 4.9% return on investment, which is, you know, it's a lot lower, a lot less than if your ratepayers or customers were served by an investor-owned utility. And so, of course, that's where the savings comes in. You only need a 4.9% rate of return versus a 9 or 11%. Now, this slide is probably one of the more important slides in my slide deck. What this shows is what your projected cash balances are going to be over the next 5 years and what rate track we're proposing and how that affects your cash reserves and your targeted operating income. Now, remember, we want to stay below that target operating income because that's an upper boundary in a sense. And you can see that with this rate track, we're looking at operating income of a little less than $1 million a year, about $1 million a year. And we're able to fund the capital improvement program, which varies between $6.5 million and about $9 million a year. And with these rate adjustments, we're able to fund that capital improvement program. So one of the key questions to the board is looking at these financial projections and the results. Does the rate track of 2.5% adjustment make sense? Are you in agreement with that rate track? And that's one of the key questions I have for the board.
You want to take that question to the board right now?
No, we can come back to it. The next part is the cost of service results. And what a cost of service study shows is it looks at how much it costs to provide service to each class of customers and compares it to the revenue we're projected to receive. And to see what classes need bigger increases than other classes to move them toward cost of service. Now, if you look overall, to hit that target rate of return, we would need a 6.8% increase. And of course, we're not asking for that. We're asking for 2.78. The residential show to meet cost of service, they would need 11%. So a little bit higher than the average increase of 6.8. Then when we look at like your general service, they're pretty much right at cost of service. Irrigation is right at cost of service. Then we have, and so is the cable TV, real close. But then we have these outliers, like the wheeling rate.
Yeah, TV.
And
So.
the wheeling rate tends to fluctuate. Each time we do a cost of, what's that?
I'm sorry, we have a question on the
What,
commission.
can you describe a wheeling rate?
Maybe
Thank you.
wheeling is where we basically wheel power over our line to somebody else. So in this case, we actually wheel power from BPA over our system to PGE. Eagle
Oh,
Point
I
area.
see. Oh, okay. So it's like a
It's transfer. Yes.
transfer. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And I would also add cable TV is actually boosters in the system that may not be metered.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Cable TV. Yeah.
And last time we did the study, it showed the need for a 10% increase. And the year before that, at the time before that, it was 30%. It fluctuates because of their usage tends to fluctuate fairly substantial. That's one. But the other item that's driving that, it's a very, very small amount of revenue. It's the investments that have been made in the distribution and transmission infrastructure, which is driving that rate higher. So what you're going to see is we gave them a little bit higher of an increase of 5%. Again, it's a very small revenue item. Then we have municipal lighting. And historically, we have never charged municipal lighting or the city the full cost of the lights. And what we're doing here is, again, we're giving them a little bit more than the average increase, just to consistently move them a little bit closer. But we don't want to affect the city's general fund either.
Mark,
So it's
Can I pause you again 1 second? Sorry. We're gonna go back to our general manager for some comments.
So Mark, when you're looking at the 11% change in residential customer, is that primarily driven by the cost of materials and labor? What's the driver for that? Because power supply cost is flat.
Yeah, that is correct. It's in your case, it's primarily driven because of increased cost and also increased investments in the distribution and transmission system that McMinnville Water and Light has completed over the last several years. So those are the driving factors. I'll be very honest, when I look at that 11% compared to the average of 6.8, you're never going to fully meet cost of service. I mean, it's virtually impossible because the usage patterns are changing all the time. And we try to get within like 10% of cost of service. What that means is if the average adjustment's 6.8, I scan that percent change column. And if I see anybody above a 17.8%, then they're significantly different than cost of service. And that's where I want to give them a heavier adjustment. So that number, that 11% is not something that concerns me.
Thank
All
you.
of your major rate classes are pretty close to cost of service.
Thank you. I think we're ready to move on.
Okay.
We're back to municipal lighting.
Yeah, the municipal lighting is something that we give them a little bit more of an increase, the city, each time we do this, but we don't give them substantial to really make a dent in this subsidy to municipal lighting. Again, we don't necessarily want to affect the general fund. So, and that's not unusual. That we have clients that don't charge for lighting. We have some that charge the full cost of service amount. Most of them charge only a portion of it, and that's what you're doing. Is there any questions about these results?
Not seeing any. Thank you.
One of the most least understood charges that an electric utility has is the fixed monthly customer charge. A lot of times, you know, they relate it to like a Dunkin' Donuts, for example, where Dunkin' Donuts doesn't charge you to walk through the door. Why does an electric utility charge that fixed charge every month? And to try to understand it, you know, Dunkin' Donuts makes an investment on behalf of the community. But an electric utility makes an investment specifically for that customer. You know, because when they have a meter installed on their home or the facility, the utility had the cost to install the meter. They have the responsibility to repair it, to replace it, to read the meter every month, to send the customer a bill, and to install and maintain the service drop to that customer. Those are fixed costs that do not vary based on consumption. But there's also a controversial part of the customer charge, and that's there's a portion. We can't deliver electricity to that home without having a wire that runs from the substation to the home or facility. And what we do to identify how much of that wire to put into the customer charge, we do what's called a minimum system analysis. And what that does is it looks at the cost of the minimum sizing requirements of the system, and it rolls that minimum sizing amount into the customer charge. Obviously, the system is not built at the minimum sizing. There's additional capacity built into it. And that amount is rolled into the usage component of the rate. So those are the factors that make up that fixed monthly customer charge. Because what you're going to see in our rate design and in the cost of service study, some increases in those fixed monthly customer charges. Now, part of the reason why it's important for utilities to charge the appropriate rate is to prevent subsidization from customers. It stabilizes the utilities' revenues to a degree, but it reduces seasonal subsidies. To give you an example of that, I live in Michigan, and I think Michigan is a great state to live in the summer. The winters are pretty brutal. And so about 15% of our population leaves to warmer climates in the winter months. But we still have to maintain that service drop to them. And if we don't charge them the proper customer charge, that means the year-round ratepayers will be subsidizing these seasonal customers. So it becomes a fairness issue as far as charging the appropriate fixed monthly customer charge. Now, the downside of it is it will adversely impact low-use customers, no doubt about that. However, low-income customers are not necessarily low use. And we have done extensive studies on low-income customers' usage of electricity. And what we see is they do use a little bit less typically than the average residential, but there's a certain number of them that use substantially more. than the average residential. So when you adjust the customer charge, what's happening? And when you increase it, you may be adversely impacting some low income, but you're actually benefiting other low income customers. And so what you're going to see is some recommendations to increase these customer charges. When we looked at it, you're currently charging residentials $15.10 a month. The cost of service study says that fixed charge should be $17.80. So what you're going to see is an increase in that rate. This is now I'm getting into the rate design that we're proposing. Overall, we're looking at 2.78% adjustments, and we're proposing rates for the next 2 years. And the residential, we're proposing an average increase of 2.8%, consistent with the system average. The wheeling and the cable TV, 5%. Lighting, 3%, a little bit higher than the average. And then a little bit less, not much, but for the general service and irrigation of 2.75. So there's no major changes that we're making as far as rates, class rates overall. For the residential, in the customer charge, we're proposing $1 increase each year to the customer charge from $15.10 to $16.10, and then to $17.10. And then very slight adjustments in the energy components of the rate. So the first block up to 1,000 will go from 0.0595 to 6 cents, and then to 0.0605. And the outer block, the excess rate above 1,000, we gave them a little bit more of an increase. So from about 6.4 cents to a little over 6.6, and then to 6.9. When we look at the impact on customers at different usage levels, at 250 kilowatt hours, they would see a little less than a 4% increase. At 1,000 kilowatt hours, they would see a 2% increase. And at 2,500 kilowatt hours, they'd see something about 3.5%. And this, of course, is one of your major rate classes. And I want to just ask the board what they think of this rate design for the residential rate class.
Oh, right now.
Commission? Thoughts?
I do have a question about how you determine the increase on the usage part of it. Like if you're doing 2.8% for the monthly charge, what do you look at to come up with what should happen with the energy charge?
It's a great question. Do you remember when I said that there's a controversial part of this facilities charge that's rolled in to make up that rate? Well, when we do this study, when we do the analysis to allocate that minimum system sizing requirement, when we do that, we're allocating a certain amount of capacity that goes along with that customer charge. Well, that minimum amount of capacity can handle a certain amount of energy. So to prevent overcharging this first block of energy, we actually try to remove some of that or that overcharging from it. And that's how we determine the first block and the second block's usage. So we're actually taking part of this dollar increase and we're giving less of an increase to this group because we've increased that customer charge, which also has some distribution recovery in it for that 1,000. Does that make sense?
I'm struggling a little bit, but
I didn't do a very good job of explaining it. I apologize. But it's mainly because of the usage patterns of customers. They're 1,000 and less. And what we've done to the customer charge that gives us guidance on where to set that first block of energy to prevent those customers from being overcharged in a sense. So we're removing a portion of the distribution system in that first block of energy. And of course, the second block of energy, they're getting charged not just the power supply and transmission, but the full charge associated with the distribution system.
So the block one is weighted differently than block two.
And so when we, if we go back a couple of slides, when we talked about the facilities charge, one of those comments was, the facility charge increase may impact, the low usage customers. And that's first tier are the low usage customers that we're talking about, right? And so I'm wondering, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, if the low usage customers are going to be impacted, wouldn't the increase in block two, and then I don't even see a block three level, but it feels like, I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, if you charged more for the usage of the block two and then potentially block three customers, then these low use customers might not have to have so much of a facilities charge increase. But I know I'm missing a lot of things. I'm just trying to get my mind.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. What the cost of service study does is it tells you the ideal rates to charge. Now, what you're bringing up is more social issues. And that's something that from the board's perspective, that's part of the reason why we're talking to you about it, because those social issues, you may want to take those into account. And, we can adjust this to take into account those social issues. My job is not to determine that, it's to help you to understand the positives and the negatives of whatever you're considering. So if we try to minimize the impact on low use customers, then that would mean that we're giving them a subsidy. That subsidy has to come from somebody else because we have to meet our revenue requirements. So then higher use customers have to subsidize the low use customers. And that's a decision that the board needs to give us the guidance on. And if that's the direction you want us to go, we certainly can do that.
So,
But in the previous slide, you'd said that low use customers aren't necessarily low income users.
Right.
So I think
That's correct.
the social question is in the income, the low income, not in the low use.
I think
Is it both?
there's two different questions. One, are you looking to create a rate system that benefits those who are
Oh,
conserving
yes,
electricity?
yes, I
Or are
see.
you looking to build a rate system that's taking into account the socioeconomic factors?
I see, yes, and we would, I would assume we'd want to have discussion about both.
so Mark, that brings up the question of a third tier. Is that a common having 3 blocks instead of 2, or is?
Yeah, there's a lot of utilities that do have more than 2 blocks, especially in California. And there is a certain amount of cost justification for it. And we could create a 3rd block if that's the direction that the board wanted us to go.
And the logic for that would be essentially you're looking at it from a conservation perspective. You're looking at it from, obviously, in our case, it hasn't been an issue, but it's going to be going forward where new resources are going to be more costly than the ones we have today. So wouldn't you, instead of spreading those costs among everybody, wouldn't you allocate those costs to the higher tiers?
Great point. And that is part of the justification for inclining block rates that you're describing. I mean, you have inclining block now, but we could add a third tier, definitely. And the justification for that is exactly what you said. The power you get from BPA is very low cost power. But once you exceed your high water mark, then then the power that you bring in costs more. So we could create a third block if you wanted us to. We would need some additional information from your billing system to do that, but we certainly could do that.
That was gonna be my question too, is if a third block would fold in easily with their existing billing system, or if that would be a systems change.
I think it would, we'd have to double check, but I think we could do that. And what I would propose is that you keep the two blocks fairly close together to start with, because right now our supply costs are fairly the same, but as time goes on, you want to make that separation bigger because those costs are going to be coming in.
And I'm just wondering for clarification, a block and a tier are the same.
Yeah.
We're just using different words.
Right.
And if we moved in that direction of developing a third block, would we be discussing that at implementing that this current year? Or,
We don't have to implement it
okay,
this
so
year.
we could
We have time.
explore that, but not necessarily, because I think that bears some thought
Yeah,
in how to communicate that and the rationale behind
Our
that.
current power contract expires in 2028, so
Okay.
we have some time, but that's kind of what's happening is, so for example, right now in this next rate case, which is going to start October 1 of 2023,
Mhm.
BPA is looking at increasing the tier 2 rate from roughly $30 to $60.
Mhm.
We don't have any tier 2 energy right now, but down the road, we probably will.
Block tier is a term of art used in the BPA context.
Okay.
So that is block and term aren't necessarily.
Yeah.
So tier
For our
is-
case,
For our discussion, we talk about them as the same. Okay.
Just as a perspective, what is the break even point on solar?
it's not good here because,
No, but I mean, that's a number that we should
yeah,
know.
okay, so right now, our BPA cost is roughly $35 a megawatt hour. And if I remember right, and it's been a while since I looked, wind and solar are more than double that right.
Okay, I'm thinking of people with a residential application. At what point is it a break even that would pay for itself? And in essence, take us out there,
That's
12, 15 cent power, 20.
probably,
Okay, so we'd have to be 3 times what we're doing.
yeah, right now we only have, I think it's 50 customers that have net metering or solar on their homes.
Which was a lot about tax stuff rather.
Right. And so that's the only reason that it really pencils out that way is because of the tax incentives.
Yeah.
If they weren't there, that would not work.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Part of the reason it's not economical or it's difficult to install a lot of solar in your area is because your electric rates are probably the cheapest in the country. As far as, your whole region. It's because of BPA and the hydro energy you have. And so when you're charging rates that are, 6-7 cents kilowatt hour, it makes it very difficult to financially justify the installation of rooftop solar. Like if you're in California, your rates are going to be, 15 to 18 cents kilowatt hour. That makes it more economical. But you have to remember too, from an environmental standpoint, a lot of your energy is produced with hydro, so there's no carbon emissions from it. So, you're probably one of the most environmental areas in the United States because of the amount of hydro generation you have.
The other problem that we have here, and I'm talking, in our service territory, is that our capacity factor for solar is so low. We're somewhere between 12 and 15%, that you don't get enough energy off of it to pay for itself in time. Where you go into the desert areas, you might be upwards of 25 to 30%.
Yep.
So.
Mhm.
You're probably the worst area in the country to install solar. Sorry to say that.
Mhm.
Well, there's that.
But that's why hydros work. We're,
Right.
we're the worst for solar, but we're probably the best for hydro.
Yeah, so that,
For now,
Yeah. All it takes our tech trying to take it.
or the cost become.
Yeah.
substantial.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, it sounds like the direction that you want me to take is to add a block. But because we, the worst thing I can do as a rate consultant is to design a rate that doesn't meet your revenue requirements. That'd be really bad. So what I'm gonna do is to add block 3, but like what was discussed, I'll make it very similar to our block 2 rate. So I don't miss your revenue requirements until we get good data in the next study to actually set it with confidence.
it's more of a placeholder.
I
Yes.
wonder if we might take a minute to just to kind of expand on the hydropower aspect and some of the nuance of that, since we are shipping some of that clean energy away, and there is still an associated cost that gets layered in. I was thinking specifically about kind of the influence of the Columbia River Treaty that we were discussing last
Oh.
February, and I think that has a pretty significant dollar impact on our on our customers.
Yeah, so the Columbia River Treaty, and I don't know if Mark knows this, but that was done back in, I think, 1964 or 65, where it was a coordination agreement between the US and Canada that basically sent energy back to Canada. And the estimates are somewhere between, I think it's $100 and $300 million in benefit that goes to Canada, our ratepayers don't get. And so basically it's Canada is receiving more of a benefit than the US side is. And that's directly tied to what you would call the consumer-owned utilities. As a BPA customer, we have preference rights to the federal power, and there's 135 or 36 preference customers of Bonneville. They're the COUs, which would be the co-ops, municipals, and the PUDs. And basically what ends up happening is we send money, essentially, we're sending energy back to Canada that we could either use or BPA could sell into the market to offset our rates. We still have some of the lowest rates in the country, even with that. But you're talking probably 15, I'm just guessing off the top of my head, probably somewhere between 15 and 20%. Maybe a little bit lower than that our rates could go down if we were more of a, true equity between the two. So,
There's all kinds of things help drive the rates down. Fish.
Yes. Well, those drive the rates the other way.
Well, no, but I'm saying remove all those
Yeah,
artificial
yeah.
things that have been placed on us the last 40 years.
Well, and you have to put it in perspective, roughly 25 to 30% of our rate, our BPA rate, is for fish mitigation costs.
40%,
25 to 30.
25.
So roughly $10 of our BPA rate is for fish.
We continue to pay for our sins of the past. It's a failed system.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, that actually, Columbia Generating, which is the one nuclear plant that's running from those, is actually some of the lowest cost nuclear power around at about $46 a megawatt hour. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Back to you, Mark.
Okay. The next one is a general service rate. And this one we changed right now for the first 15 kW on these general service customers, there is no demand charge. And you also have what's called an inclining block rate, like in the residential. And what's occurring here is these smaller use customers are getting subsidized in this class by the higher use customers over 15 kW. So what we're trying to do is to implement a demand charge on that first block 0 to 15, but we cannot go right to the 650 because it would have extreme adverse impacts on customers. So what we did initially was implement it, started at $1.50 demand to try to minimize those impacts in year one. And in year two, go to $3. And of course, we'll probably in the future, if the board agrees with this, continue moving that upward.
So Mark,
But that's probably the biggest change that we made here.
so Mark, is that again where we would then, if the commission wanted to reward, aka subsidize low users, then this would be another mechanism of doing that? Am I understanding that correctly or incorrectly? If there's no demand charge
Yes.
happening, it's because they're a low user or conservative user of electricity, or am I misunderstanding?
I wouldn't say low user necessarily, because general service customers are all different sizes. Right now, because of the way the rates are structured, especially with this inclining block rate and no demand charge for the first 15 kW, these customers are not paying the amount that they should. And they're getting subsidized by these other customers that are hitting block 2 and block 3. It's not so much a conservation issue because customers in this class vary so much in size. You can have customers that are only a 5 kW customer, and you can have others that are 1,000 kW. So the range is pretty substantial. It's more just to try to correct the deficiencies in the rate structure.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other questions about this?
So is there a reason, is there a historical reason why this wasn't put in place earlier, or hasn't been put in place before? Why is it coming now?
I could probably.
That's a great question. And historically, we never had demand meters on those customers, and now we do. Because demand recording meters tended to be very expensive, and it was hard to cost justify the installation of those on small users. But now we're able to get that data economically.
We don't have anybody residentially that would have a demand meter, do we?
No.
So even if you're a micro business, you're probably going to have a demand meter.
Correct.
So here's kind of the crazy thing, the sins of our past. In the 50s and 60s, when we had cheap hydropower, the promotion for the all-electric home was a huge thing.
Gold medallion home.
And here in McMinnville, we had what was called a heat rate, 2 cents. And so guess what happened in the community? Electric boilers got put in anywhere that was using hot water heat. So the pool got a big electric boiler in. The school district changed all the old oil-fired boilers. The college went to a whole bunch of use and stuff. And so churches did that. I know one church in town that their KW charge was nothing for years. And then we instituted demand charge. Demand charge was off the chart because they only turned the power on the weekends one time a month. But anyway,
That set the demand for the month.
so what happens then is we have all these stranded installations that we had promoted to be done in the 60s and 70s. And now we have demand charge.
Well, but here's the irony in all of this, is we're going back full circle in this again, because now we're talking more and more about decarbonization and getting rid of natural gas. And guess what's going to happen? People are going to come back to electric. So
on this chart, and you may have said this, but on demand charge block 2 and 3, there are no increases year over year. Is that purposeful?
I think that's where you are.
When we looked at the cost of service study, what happens is when you start getting over 1,000, it's this complicated answer. But when you get over a certain level, they tend to be what's called high load factor customers. And so when you have high load factor customers, the demand charge needs to be higher for them. And I know that sounds strange, but the reason is because of something called coincidence factors and diversity between the loads. There's no diversity in their usage. And it's, like I said, it's difficult to explain, but it's cost justified for you to have a higher demand.
But the numbers aren't changing in year one or the current year, year one and year two for those block 2 and block 3. Those are still
Correct.
consistent work. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a couple of reasons is I wanted, if I increase these demands by the implementation of the first block of demand, that $1.50, for example, all the customers are going to pay that because they're going to roll through the 15, pay the $1.50. Then they're going to go to block 2 and block 3. So they're still going to see an increase in their demand charges because of putting in that first block.
Okay, thank you.
And the other thing to remember here is that we build the electric system. We don't build it to serve the kilowatt hours. We build it to serve the demand. Because we have to be able to serve the demand any instant in time. And so basically, if you go out and look at our system, that's why transformers are rated in KVA and all these other things, but we're actually building the system to serve the peak demand of the system, not the kilowatt hours.
I see. Okay.
So
thank you.
there used to be a trick you tried to pull as a customer.
Yep.
And that was to, the window I think was 15 or 30 minutes. That's all gone.
That's all. So the
And
way
so-
we have a rolling demand now, so you can't do that anymore.
So imagine a 100,000-foot warehouse with huge lighting load. And you try to keep that load just under the thing.
Yeah.
Well,
And so we were, as an energy person, we were saving money. So guess what we did as a utility? Well, you're thwarting our income. So we changed the window, and
so it used to
it's
be,
been fun to watch this over 40 years.
so we used to have a 30-minute demand, and what people would do is they would game it, and what they would do is you could
We
ramp
sell
up
black boxes to
for
do it.
15 minutes and then ramp back down, you cut your demand charge. So now we've gone to a 15-minute demand with like, I think there's 3-minute rolling blocks in the 15 minutes, so you can't do that.
See?
Got it. Okay. All right. Yeah, thank
So there
you.
was a church in McMinnville that had probably $1,000 a month that they paid. And then put a black box in and cut it way down, but it was so cold on Sundays, it was in the end, get rid of the boiler. That's what happened. Everyone dream of, get rid of the boiler.
All right, shall we continue?
Municipal lighting, we did an across the board 3% adjustment on the municipal. So the city's general fund is going to have about 7,000 a year more in expenses associated with lighting.
And this is, I would probably add, this is another area where we're actually moving towards LED lighting. So as time goes on, we'll see fewer and fewer of the, you have them up there, I don't see them up there, the HPS, the high pressure sodium.
And is that the typical rate that's happened in previous years? About 3% annually?
It was, that's what I believe we gave it in other years. I didn't look specifically, but I do believe that's what it was.
It's been higher than that in previous years.
It's been higher than that in
Yeah.
previous years. And then will that, so what you're saying with the LEDs, then will that start to level out as the fixtures get replaced and as we're just using LEDs?
Yeah, we're just, so what we're doing right now is we're only replacing eyes and bulbs. If the fixture fails, we replace it with an LED. And we're just slowly moving away from the HPS. So even if now we're kind of moving towards, if the bulb or the eye even fail, we just replace it with an LED. Because it's getting harder to actually get the bulbs and get the fixtures. So we've just decided, at least on the smaller fixtures right now, the 100-watt, the bigger fixtures, we're actually going to do a pilot, or we're going to do a program this year where we're going to replace the 250-watt municipal 400-watt fixtures with LEDs on Highway 99. That's in our budget this year to do that. So
The rate schedules that the commission will see in September also are not going to have the HPS and the LEDs broken out separately. We're going to have a melded rate for each wattage. So when we do the cost of service, we break them out separately, but our rate schedules will reflect one melded rate because moving forward, we're only looking at purchasing LEDs and installing LEDs in the field.
And also I'd probably add one other thing, Mark, that the municipal lighting rate actually comes out of the transportation fund, not the general fund. And so that's another point for, so Remy knows, I don't know if you knew that or not, but it actually comes out of the transportation fund. So.
Is there any other questions about this municipal lighting? And the rental lighting, again, we did across the board 3% adjustment in the rental lighting rates. In the irrigation rate design, it's a relatively small class. They got the system average increase about 2.8%, 2.7 and 2.8. So and what we did here, we kept the demand charges the same, and we put the increases between the facilities charge and in the energy rates. And overall, the average customer is going to see about 2.8% increase. A couple of things that we just want to make sure, clarification items really. The projection that we did included the one-time BPA distribution of funds, and we included the cash that was generated or we received from that was included in the projection. So the other item is when we do a rate study, when customers connect, some of these customers put in their own infrastructure and then donate that infrastructure to the utility. And so the utility does not have an upfront cost for that. They do have the responsibility to replace it in the future, but they didn't have the initial cost. So what we do for rate making purposes is the depreciation expense associated with this contributed capital, we remove in our calculations. So if I, for example, identify $1 million of operating income, when you actually get the audit's going to include the depreciation expense on contributed capital. And so that $1 million operating income that I'm projecting is going to go down for audit purposes. So just to make sure just to help you to understand that what we use for rate making is different than what an auditor is going to do for your books. The last item is you have a transformer rental rate, and we're looking at modifying that transformer rental rate, and we'll probably be bringing that back to the board during a future board meeting. So is there any questions about these items before I move on to my last slide?
No, thank you.
We mentioned that back in 2021, PURPA implemented some new standards, and because you're a PURPA qualifying utility, you have to abide by these standards. And it equated to really there's standards related to two items. One was demand response programs. I'll explain that in a moment. And the other item was electric vehicle charging stations and setting rates for those. And what demand response programs are things like time of use rates or interruptible rates. They want you to put in place price signals to customers that gives them more control over their electric bills, and also lowers the demand of the utility. And one of the things that needs to be considered as part of this standard, just for compliance purposes, is the board needs to consider demand response programs. Now, one of the things going forward in the future that we've been talking about is the implementation of time of use rates. And right now, we're not in a position where we can implement those, but in the future, that is in the plans. And it's around the country, that's where the utilities are headed. They're moving all their customers to time of use rates. In Michigan, all the investor-owned utilities have residential customers on time of use rates. In California, all the investor-owned utilities have their customers on residential on time of use. Missouri is put all the residential customers on time of use. And it's something that is from a customer satisfaction point, it tends to improve customer satisfaction because it gives them control. They can put in place enabling devices like setback thermostats to help them shift their usage to lower cost time periods. It also helps in the purchase, when they purchase electric vehicles, they have the ability to charge them at night. And at night is the lowest cost time for electricity to produce it. And so it gives them the incentive to charge their vehicles at night rather than during your peak hours where the cost more. And this is something that we're hoping to come back to the board at a future date with these demand response programs. But this is really, I have this slide in more for compliance purposes for the PURPA Act. So is there any questions about that?
So
For this?
I have a question about your kind of closing statement. You have this slide in for compliance purposes. We've conceptualized going to time and use rates, but it's a down the road project. But what you've just told us about it is that it improves customer satisfaction and perhaps incentivizes conservation, and that we're required to do it because we're a PURPA qualified utility. Is that accurate?
What is accurate? You're required to consider it. You're not required to implement it.
Right, you're required to consider.
Although I think that in the future, it is something that you probably would want to implement.
And right now, our power supply isn't structured that way.
Okay.
So, our BPA contract doesn't, look at that. It's our hours now are, well, there's two periods essentially, heavy load, light load hours. So heavy load hours are 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Monday through Saturday, and then everything else is light load, what they call light load hours. So the thing also to remember is, yes, we can do demand response, but we only have X amount of energy. So even if you spread the energy from the peak into other times, what it's saving you is it's saving you the demand on the transmission system. The amount of energy, all you're doing is spreading the energy out over time, but you still have only X amount of water.
So are you saying that while we're required to consider it, we don't, how are you recommending that we think about that from a planning perspective?
So the way we would think about it from a planning perspective is we're looking at moving essentially our metering system from what we call an AMI, automated meter reading, to an AMI. Because right now it would be very difficult for us to implement that because we don't have AMI. So your meters would have to be set up to do the time of use, where if you had it bringing data back to the system,
I see.
you don't necessarily have to do all that. So there's a big change in the metering that we'll have to do at that point.
And that means even a different type of meter than we're currently using.
Right.
But we are swapping.
We're swapping meters to the AMR system right now.
And can those be changed?
Those can be changed down the road.
Okay.
But the thing is, what we'd be looking at is some type of system that can read those meters, even not having to replace them, but at least being able to read them, because they send out a signal roughly every 20 seconds. But it's the down the road part. So the first step is we've got to get the meters installed, and we're about halfway done on the electric system now. The water meters, the technology we're putting in today is the technology. It's not going to change because it's in the ground and you can't do anything with that. But there are systems out there that are wireless that can pick up the AMR meters and do those things. But we're probably looking at, I would say, somewhere between 5 and 10 years before we're ready to, move that way.
Why 5 to 10? Why so long?
Because we have our current BPA contract,
It's till 28.
28, so there's 5 years. And then the next contract, we would be looking at potentially maybe doing something. But getting the meters in place is going to take that much time.
Okay.
And then the other part of that is we're going to have to completely redo our rate structures and then teach people those things, because typically you have to educate them on why you're paying more during the middle of the day than you are at night, and physically changing their behavior.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a
I think
long
people
process.
are used, I don't know. I mean, I had to do that with the internet company.
Right.
That was that was the only way that we saved our company, basically, was to implement usage restrictions and monitoring and measurements, and customers figured out really fast why and the what of that. But from the BPA standpoint, so the contract right now is through 2028. Are there other BPA, do you know if BPA has contracts with other entities that are using usage based at this point? Because our BPA contract rates would need to look different in order for that to flow down, right?
And right now they're not,
there's no other entity that
not that I'm aware of.
that has a different contract.
Yeah,
with
because
BPA.
BPA wanted, when we did the last contract, they wanted all the contracts as standard as possible. And so that's why.
It'll be interesting to watch that and see if anyone else moves more aggressively on that path with BPA to have a different contract.
So I have a question about item 2. It says one piece is the demand response programs, and then the second one is promote electrification of transportation. What does that mean? Because that doesn't, promote means that we're not necessarily doing it, but we're encouraging it.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's through the standard. That's not necessarily us doing that.
The reason that
I see.
PURPA exists, I guess.
That's kind of a federal,
But it's saying that they're requesting utilities to consider promotion of electrification of transportation. So I guess I'd like to know what that might look like. 'Cause that doesn't sound like that's a system-wide,
well,
if you're promoting the use of.
and the problem that we're going to face in promoting that is the consequences. Because there's going to be significant consequences to the electric system in terms of having to upgrade our system.
So it's coming.
It's coming. And so that's why, we've already started looking at putting in bigger conduit, when we put conduit in the ground, so that we don't have to come back later and tear it up and put something else in.
Well, I know that this is an area that Visit McMinnville is looking at investing money in, so I hope that we're talking to them about that.
We are. We actually just had McMinnville Urban Renewal Advisory
weeks ago.
Committee just had a meeting in which John and I were at, but also Visit McMinnville was at, because they've received a grant to install 4 electric vehicle charging stations around the city. So the city, Murac, Water and Light, Visit McMinnville, we're all in that meeting room, and we're gonna be coming back for a follow-up meeting, making sure that we are all on the same page and understanding the support that would be the infrastructure that would need in order to run a successful program with those. But that would be the first big investment into that.
So remember, right now, we get what are called clean fuel credits. And so that's tied to transportation. And there's roughly, Jamie can correct me if I'm wrong, if she's on still. There's, I think, roughly 400 EVs in our service territory. And so we get those credits based on the number of EVs in our service territory.
I won't keep talking about, I would just add that I'm wondering how housing developers are thinking about electric vehicles
Well, so
this way.
Yeah, you got the thumbs up.
I got it right.
Jamie's.
So that's the other thing that we're thinking about too, is because typically right now, when we install infrastructure in a subdivision, we're typically putting in a transformer and that has somewhere between 6 and 10 customers on it. Okay, because most of the load in the homes is on the gas system. Your heat, your hot water are your two biggest loads. Those are on the natural gas. So now what we're gonna see is we're gonna see people putting in EV chargers, which is gonna increase that demand. So we're gonna be looking at having to reduce or increase the size, either reduce the number of customers on a transformer or physically increasing the sizes of the transformers.
Okay.
So there's a lot of
Right.
those things that are gonna have to happen.
And so what's our
Just as a reminder to the commission too, we do have a separate PURPA hearing scheduled in September to discuss these two standards specifically. And so Jamie will be walking the commission through a more detailed discussion on these standards.
Thank you for keeping us on track.
The thing that we should really be cautious about is some of these changes are so expensive that we may not, we're a micro utility compared to a big utility. We just don't have enough customers to ever make it pay without being way expensive. The other thing is, I might say that the customer satisfaction with some of the implementation of setback thermostats and all that. I would argue that maybe that's not the case. From a social standpoint, as we start doing those things, those folks that have little now won't have the opportunity to do that because it's so expensive. You're changing things in your home and stuff. In the Southwest, if the power companies you sign up for their program, you have to have an automated thermostat that works off of Wi-Fi, and in the middle of the night, they shut your power down. And so people might go to bed maybe at 70 degrees and they're waking up at 85 at 2 o'clock in the morning. Why is it so hot and stuff? Well, it's because they shut your power down for, or they do it with the thermostat. So people are out there kicking their thermostat back up or overriding it or taking the software. So it's really interesting. I don't think a lot of people are happy and the huge savings that they're painted. They get paid a fee, like Arizona Power pays $20 to you for doing this for an annual basis. But my concern socially is, as we would move on into these things, the people that at least have means and stuff are just, because we've over the years we learned a lot of there's still baseboard electric in homes. There's no way really to control that. A lot of people in furnaces, so there's a lot of stuff that's still.
But what you're talking about is demand response.
Yeah.
And actually Water and Light used to have demand response.
On water heaters.
Yeah. Back in the 1950s.
When we had the power plant.
Yeah, when we actually generate our own power here, we have demand response here. So again, it was just kind of coming back full circle again.
All done with a mercury switch that now would be so illegal it'd be funny. It's like you'd find in a washing machine in the old days. Yeah.
All right, I think we're ready to continue. Do you have any additional?
No, I don't have any additional slides. I have to make one change. It sounds like, and to our proposal, and that has to do with the residential to add a block 3. I think that was the only change that the board recommended.
No, he's going to make that change for the
Next
next.
future, not for, because we still have to set the hearing date.
You still have to set the hearing
And
date.
so I think that's for next year research, or is it for the hearing?
He's gonna add it, but we're gonna have another meeting, correct, Trina?
We will, and Jamie also pointed out that we do already have a block 3. Right now, it's the same as block 2. So we do have a block 3, but if we could just make a note to implement this for the next cost of service, if we do want to make that block different. Right now, we're not in jeopardy of falling into tier 2 power at the moment. And so we'd rather not have a block 3 for this coming October if the commission is okay with that.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
So Mark, I will just make a note for the next time we do cost of service to make sure we discuss that and look at a block 3 early on in the process. So I don't think we need to change it for this time.
I can hand it over to you.
I don't have anything more.
Okay. Well, wonderful. Well, do commissioners have any additional questions or comments,
No, I don't.
for, staff? Now, is there anybody, in the room that would like to ask any questions? Is there anybody on Zoom or, that would like to ask any questions?
We do not have any
Any,
members of the public on Zoom.
Commissioner Gormley?
Madam Mayor, I do have just a couple of comments to share. We need to remember that over the next 4 or 5 years, we're burning up $10 million worth of cash. And we have no projection on how to replace that. The second thing is, going down the road, what do we want as utility? And I need to ask that question earlier. So anyway, and my response would be, I want us to build a rate system for posterity. That generations to come will be able to enjoy this utility. At some point, we don't hit the wall and PG takes us over or something. So we've got to recognize what it takes to stay in business, maintain those cash crunches, and have enough operating capital to deal with these big waves that might happen, especially if anybody ever makes a run at trying to shut Bonneville down and federal government take it over. So,
And I would probably want to add maybe one more piece to that would be reliability,
yeah, amen.
because I think that is one of the things as time moves on and we're probably not going to, low cost is not going to be, I think it's going to be more about reliability. And we've done a very good job in that, but we need to, and you can see that because of Mark's comment about, the age of our system. And I was just going to make one comment about that is, if you go out and look at our distribution system, the substations that we have, basically the heart of the system, our oldest power transformer, our oldest one in our distribution system is from 1996. Okay, if you were to go out and look at PGE, that would not be the case. And, so we have done a really good job of making sure that we replace equipment, not when it fails, but before it fails. Because we want to be in that mode where we're replacing our system before it actually fails. And that is what helps keep our reliability numbers high or good.
Yeah.
I also think we need to really understand that we are so at risk at Bonneville's bent on not doing repair work like they used to.
Yeah, that's
And
all.
I mean, if we go down somewhere, we could be in a world of hurt.
I can send you a letter that was sent to BPA about 2 weeks ago from
Well, we've
Public
talked,
Power Group about that issue in the transmission grid, on the transmission system. That very issue.
they underfund their repair work.
Well, it's what I would say is not necessarily underfunded, it's under executed. They're not executing to their capital program. And so,
Is that part of a conversation with the contract and negotiations? I mean, if you're buying all your power from somebody, isn't there some discussions about how they take care of the network that they're selling to you?
Right.
Using to sell to you?
well, remember, there's 2 contracts. We have the power contract, which is the one coming up, and then we have the transmission contract. And I think the transmission is, if I'm right, is it 2031, Jamie? Is that when that one comes due?
And is that fall more
That's
in
what
the
we're saying.
transmission?
Yeah, that would be the
contract
transmission
discussion?
side.
That's
But we're having those conversations
right now.
with BPA about getting their
Thumbs
system.
up from Jamie.
Okay, so I'm doing good. in my memory here.
When was that transmission contract? When did that start?
2011, I believe. They're both 20-year contracts.
Okay.
So those are things that, we're constantly working with our trade organization, Public Power Council and, Northwest Requirements Utility to keep pressure on BPA to maintain the system. And what I would say is that over time, with the growth that we're going to see in electrification, we're looking at not only increasing transmission, but actually physically increasing the voltage so that we can actually have more capacity. Because, and that's not just BPA, it's us too. And so what you see right now is our crews are actually working on the linear park between Walnut City Substation and Baker Creek.
Ask about that. I walked past those. all
So-
the time.
So they're actually up,
When is that happening?
it's going on right now. So you saw the poles.
Yeah.
sitting-
I've been
Yeah.
seeing them.
So they're actually working on that. I think they're actually setting poles right now, Gene, is that right?
They're not setting poles.
Oh, wow. I
And
haven't walked
New
in a
wire
couple
in
days.
2 weeks.
So, and then they're gonna be reconductoring that wire. That's the line we bought from Bonneville back in 2019, and we've been slowly working on upgrading that line. I think once that's done, we'll have the line upgraded from Walnut City past Baker Creek sub to actually Baker Creek, right? So then we'll start on the northern part of that. And so those are things that, again, it comes back to that reliability, and we want to make sure that, we have the good reliability. That's, I think, gonna be critical in the future.
Thank you. Are there any additional staff comments or there's no one on the phone, correct, Trina? Okay,
That's correct.
all right. Any additional staff comments before we close? If not, I'm going to suggest accepting. And I'll state for the record that we did, again, we had testimony submitted by Mr. Mark Davis, and all commissioners have received a
Yes.
printed copy of this, and it will be added to the record. And so I will suggest that we accept all written materials into the hearing record and entertain a motion to continue the hearing to a later date.
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Gormley
Second.
and a second from Commissioner Tate.
I think that later date is gonna be a regular meeting in September. Is that correct, Ms. McManus?
Yes, it'll be our regular meeting in September, and I want to make sure that we also get into the hearing record, the documents from the commission packet, just noting that those are pages 57 to 102.
Very good.
It's included in my motion. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay, and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll now move to our consent agenda. Does any commissioner wish to have any item pulled from the consent agenda?
I don't.
Okay, I would entertain a motion
So
to
moved.
accept the consent agenda as presented. I have a motion from Commissioner Gormley. I have a second.
Second.
I have a second.
We'll
from
fight over it.
Commissioner Tate. All those
Can't beat Ed.
if you agree, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed say nay. And the consent agenda is approved unanimously. Has everybody had an opportunity to review accounts payable and purchasing reports? And are there any questions?
No questions here.
No
No
question.
questions.
Thank you so much. I would now ask our Human Resources Manager, Marcy Humley, to come up and introduce our new Communications Coordinator, Julie Adam.
Thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce our communications coordinator, Julie Adams. Hello. She moved here from Kansas last year, and she's been a great addition to our team.
So, do you mind saying a few words about yourself to the commission, and we'll introduce ourselves as well?
Yeah, so as Marcy said, I'm from Kansas. I came from the University of Kansas. So I was the communications coordinator for the William Allen White School of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Kansas.
Okay.
And I was there for about 8 years. And prior to that, I was the web and social media manager for the University of Kansas Medical Center, which includes the School of Medicine, School of Nursing, and School of Health Professions. And before that, I am a journalist. I have a journalism degree. So I worked at the Kansas City Star as an editor for several years before that. So that's kind of my professional background. And you're probably wondering, why did you move here from Kansas? Well, one, because it's beautiful. I mean, Kansas is beautiful in its own way. I will say, as a native Kansan, I, have love for that. But my husband is from Carlton. He was born and raised in Carlton. And, we wanted to move back. My father-in-law, we lost my mother-in-law a few years ago during the pandemic. So my husband's an only child, and my father-in-law turned 80 last month. So we moved back to just be with him and take care of him. And he had a plot of land between Yamhill and Carlton, and he is allowing us to build a house on it. So we're building a house there. So had we not have the free land, I'd be here in McMinnville. So apologies that I'm not meeting here.
PG Power.
That's what I remind her of that.
Yeah,
And water.
So a question for you. Did you have a house with a basement?
yes.
Did your husband like going in the basement and hiding from tornado warnings?
Well, I will tell you, a few years ago, when he was out of town, he actually was in Seattle when there was a tornado that came within a half a mile of our house while I was in the basement.
So my family's from Nebraska originally, and my dad, part of moving out here was to get rid of thunderstorms and tornadoes. And I can remember as a kid, 5 years old, going to the basement, looking out and seeing a tornado touching down west of the little town that my folks are from.
Yeah,
That's a-
right. Like I said, a half mile away from us, there was a piece of a metal shed wrapped around a tree, and we had debris in our yard, and there was a piece of insulation that was in our tree, stuck in our tree for about 2 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm glad to not.
Welcome. Good to have you here.
Commissioner Gormley, do you want to introduce yourself?
So I'm Ed Gormley. My family's got a plumbing and heating business here in McMinnville. I'm kind of semi-retired. Served on the board for a few years, so.
Hi, I'm Kathy Tate. I've been on the board for 2 years, and I am a retired business person from here in town, and really excited to have you on board. I saw Ed's got the history book, which I have finally finished reading and gone back and read some things and learned a ton of things. But I think it's really interesting how this commission has for almost the entire history really valued communication with the community and making sure that that all of the citizens knew what was happening and why things were happening. So I think that continues to this day. And so it's very exciting to have somebody with your talents to help us with that. So welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jody Christensen. I'm a special projects manager with the city of McMinnville, and I'm finishing up my first term on the commission. And I too appreciate communications. I think that's the way we engage with our community members and learn from them as well. And if you're doing the Instagram posts, which I'm assuming you are, they look fabulous.
Oh, it's more to come.
Yeah, great. Remy Drapkin, we met the other day, Mayor, City of McMinnville. I'm a winemaker and winery owner by day, by morning. And I've been this is my I've been with the commission just for about a year. I've been in public service with the city of McMinnville for over 12 years now. So very nice to
So,
meet you.
so for some of us, remember the mayor when the mayor was very, very young.
Girl.
Both mayors.
Both mayors are, but yeah.
Both mayors.
Right, wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. All right, we will now go to our consultant and partner reports. We'll welcome Brent Keller, Forrester. Thank you.
They wired that coffee.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, things are going real well out at the watershed. We're wrapping up the 303 road sale. About 300 loads have been shipped so far, mostly to Herbert. We're sitting at about 90% of the volume to date that I predicted. I think we're going to end up with an overrun of volume and value. We're almost to the estimated value, 1.7 million, but I think the sale is going to cut out just looking at how things are wrapping up. Once that's done, A1, the same logger, will move up the hill there and start on the 187 road sale for Boise. And so that's makes things real easy this year to manage with the same logger. Projects are underway. We're mostly working on road work at this point, related to both sales, silviculture, pre-commercial thinning and slashing and work like that will be done in the fall after fire season. As far as fire season goes, I think on the 5th, when I wrote this letter early in the day, we were at level 1. I think by the end of the day, it had already gone to level 2. So that's where we're at now, which is a moderate to high fire precaution level. And I anticipate we'll be at level 3 here real soon. I just got the message that in the like the Malala area, that district has gone to level 3 today. So Northwest 3, which is the district we're in, kind of tracks behind the valley somewhat. But I anticipate we'll go to a higher level here shortly. Any questions?
Yes, there are. Hold on, Commissioner Gormley.
Brent, a couple questions for you. I was telling John earlier that I saw a load of logs today that I'll swear were pushing 30 inches on the butt. Any chance that that might have come from one of our,
Yeah, it's probably ours.
really?
The-
We just got some big trees up. Okay. The other thing for you, this is long range thinking, and it's tied to some comments that one of our commissioners made about funding of operations and things like that. Could you, in your leisure, think about having a sale and what would encompass, say, that might be 3 times the size of what we might be doing normally? So we're having these discussions on how bad inflation is beating us up on trying to accomplish certain things, and we either borrow money or we do a couple of crazy things. So I'd just be curious, could you physically think about something that might resemble that? I know that lots of times you've got some geography working on the sales you put together and all that. So,
Commissioner, could I ask for some clarity? Are you getting at the idea of backfilling the operating
Yeah,
budget
yeah,
with
just to-
timber sales?
Capital, I think.
yeah, it's a capital. So just think about what would it take if we wanted to, the commission said, hey, we'd like to double the income 1 year. What block of trees would it take to do that, or how many blocks?
Do you think we
Sure.
should get through direction from the commission that there's a interest in pursuing that as a methodology before we do research into it?
I think the staff was gonna come back after Trina got everything together as far as the last meeting and actually have a list of recommendations.
I think if he does this, he can say yay or nay. He can look at it and maybe in 5 minutes say, no, can't do it. I just, because the little pockets we do are all kinds of.
I was thinking we just talked about
Getting up to.
getting it more even to the annual
Right.
yield, like the harvest and the annual yield evened up. And I don't remember
Yeah.
doubling,
Yeah, or tripling,
but
It's just, I mean, it's,
some of the.
I think he can go like this and know if he can do it or not. So,
But I,
because he knows the woods.
maybe
Sure.
one more thing,
Sure.
there's, Ryan, could you come up? So we had an incident that we wanted to talk about in close to the watershed, and Brent, if you could stay on too.
I just
Sure.
want to make sure that we're giving clarity to Brent, so. I'm a little concerned about asking Brent to do something before we've had time to sort of process all of the things that we were talking about. I wouldn't want you to spend a lot of time, and I also wouldn't want you to just sort of look at a map and go yay or nay. I mean, I think that it's gonna take more thought long-term. At least that's what I was assuming, that this would.
Brent, how many years have you worked for us?
The firm's been with you about 60.
But you as our steward have been with us, what, 15 years, 10 years?
Yeah, directly as the manager, like 13 years, but
Okay.
I work with Bill starting back in the 90s.
So you know this woods like the back of your hand.
Oh yeah, yep,
So that's my sense.
Right.
yeah,
So
and I think I guess at a super high like general level, I'd say there's a lot of capacity for an increased harvest just because we have a really conservative program. So over time, we're under our sustainable level on average, and so it'd be pretty simple to increase the harvest. But anyway, I'll just hang back and wait to hear
Okay,
direction there.
so we want to, I have Ryan up here, Ryan Stick. I want to talk a little bit about the incident that happened last week.
Yeah, so July 3rd, it was actually 11:45 AM, got a call from the treatment plant staff saying there was a wildfire just northeast of our watershed. And so I ran up there to see how close it was, see if it was progressing, if we needed to do any action. So I got up there. By the time I had gotten up there, they had it pretty well distinguished. It had burned a couple acres. And then our staff was prepared. We got the brush truck and the tanker was ready as well. It sounded like it was a dead snag that blew into one of the power lines, Western Oregon's power lines. But it was a scare for the staff as it being that close. So we kind of touched base on patrolling. I don't want them in the watershed because of fire danger. I don't want them to be the ones causing the fire, but to, on the main road or gates going into the watershed patrol, if there's campers. We talked with John, to call the property owner wherever somebody's camping, just to let them know you're not supposed to be there. And then Brent, you had mentioned, about trying to reach out to ODF and their emergency notification. Can you maybe touch base on that?
Yeah, so I have it set up just similar to some of the other regions, and it can vary on how it works, but they, it's a system where, like, when there's not updates to the precaution level, if it goes from a 2 to a 3, I'll get a text. Or if there's a fire, pretty much any fire in the district, you'll get a notification. And it taken me a while to get that pinned down with them, but after this incident, and I didn't get a message from them, I talked to them again here right after the 4th, and so I do have that system working now again. So that'll help on little things like that to stay posted. It's interesting. I've not heard back from A1 because I called Ben to ask about if they'd heard anything, because that's right by their shop there, pretty close. So, but it must have started and got put out pretty quick, huh, Ryan?
Yeah, they had it extinguished in a couple hours. ODF's response was stellar, along with YAML Fire and Rescue. They were there in response quickly too.
Did
So.
Panther Creek Station come up too, or?
Yeah.
Or was that that's their station? Okay. So that's how close they are. Okay,
Mhm.
that's great.
So one question I have for you, Brian, is would it make sense for you to maybe even or see if we could do a appraisal of our watershed to see what value we have there in case something, happens and we have that?
Sure.
So, I mean, I think, is that, I think what I want to be careful about and kind of the direction that we're going is you're completely within your role
I mean,
as
I
general
can-
manager to ask for that appraisal. What I want to make sure that we're veering away from is individual commissioners giving staff direction without the will of the commission, or the commission giving that direction. And so I'm not sure how closely we're.
But I think it would be a good idea for us to have.
I'm fine with that. We haven't done it in years.
Yeah, just to make sure we know what we've got and any issues that come up, we're already there.
And something like that.
Well,
if you want to do
substantially,
that or motion, you can just kind of look for a consensus of the commission. We can reflect that in the minutes
Sure.
if you feel like you want to get that kind of direction.
Sure. And
for staff.
when was the last time an appraisal was done? Ever?
I don't know if
Never?
we've ever done it.
Okay.
We've done the surveys as a
Right.
forester, not an actual appraisal.
Okay.
And is it insured?
No. We have no idea. What are we sure?
No, yeah, I mean, trying to get somebody done right.
Would the
is the
commission
problem.
like to have an
Yes, please,
appraisal?
let's do
Okay,
that.
I think we'll just
Let's do
generally
that.
say we'd like to have an
And then
appraisal.
just
You want
because I
you want
wanna
a
s-
motion, Madam Mayor? I'd so move.
You want a motion?
Well, let's do that use that nice consensus word.
We like that
So
idea.
we're looking for
Okay.
consensus. I think we have the consensus of the commission that we'd like to move forward with an appraisal of the watershed.
Yeah, so Brent, if you could, we can talk about that and you can find, I don't know
Well,
who, you have somebody on staff that can do
Yeah.
that?
Well, it's done. I mean, we just talked,
It's a value. If there's-
Yeah, John, I do valuations all the time, for
Okay.
timber. And but yeah, we have a whole appraisal group and do all kinds of certified appraisals for timber investors and the whole range of
Family.
valuing timberland. So, and our inventory is pretty up to date. We do that as a management reference, so we know what we have there. So we can turn that around pretty quick. As far, there are insurance options. It's really spendy and the deductibles are really high, but like Lloyd's of London, I don't know, they may after 2020 they may not be insuring properties anymore, but I know
Right.
at one time folks were, that was an option for folks.
Like
And
all the time,
because
couldn't
I've
get it.
done wildfire recovery and I have a little PTSD from that, the minute you said there was a fire and there are people involved, I'm assuming that there is an exit strategy for those staff up there, that there's a way to remove them
Yes.
if they were, okay.
Yeah.
Just had to be able to sleep tonight, so I want to make sure that that's.
They might end up the Oregon coast, but they're out of the way.
I don't care where they end up, as long as they end up safe, right? Like, I just want to make sure that we do everything possible to be prepared
Right.
for their safety.
So one more thing that came out of this, I think, Gene. So, because of this, we've decided to go ahead and put all of our devices in particular areas where we have a lot of tree issues onto what they call one shot to lockout. So we'll lock it. If something hits it, it opens and it's out. So what that'll cause, it'll cause longer outages and maybe more frequent outages for those customers in those areas. But I think it's also
let's do
something
that.
of safety issue too. So
Yeah.
we've already implemented that.
That's fantastic.
And I think, well, Julie's, what's that?
Was in Western Oregon.
Yeah, Western Oregon was doing the same thing as well, but I think we were actually going to send out a post on that.
Yeah, we have a post that went out today, I believe.
Okay.
And it's on our website.
So, just so,
That's fantastic. Thank you. Appreciate that, Dave.
thanks,
Right.
Ryan.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Brad.
We have no appearance requests. We have no staff reports today. We do have some new business. I might suggest we take a 5-minute break, before. we do the business.
Timing was bad.
Does that mean pizza's coming or something?
I know pizza tonight. We're gonna get through these last few items, but let's take just a quick 5-minute break. It's 4:50. We'll come back at 4:55.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
housekeeping issues. Jody, thank you. That was very, very nice comment to make. Very sweet of you
Oh,
about the protection of our employees.
I'm telling you,
Oh,
that fire
God,
changed
absolutely.
my DNA.
Absolutely.
I just,
So, that's why we have our own fire truck
yeah,
and we also have a 2,000-gallon water tanker sitting up there too. So we can
That's
respond. And we just completed wildfire training for our crews.
great.
That's
All of that needs
emergency
to be
management.
celebrated. All
Yeah.
of that needs to be celebrated.
So, I mean, that's, so She's new, right?
She's been there a couple of years now.
Oh, she-
She's great.
Over the weekend.
Their public works director, and I don't know, Shirley Ward Mullen from Carlton. She's the, I guess, the mayor pro tem or the press council president or something.
Oh, he must be council president.
Yeah.
Linda Watkins was mayor.
Yeah,
Well, we'll have to get, we really need Merkley's office to come because he's got this whole water initiative. All right. 4:55.
here it is.
Are we ready to get going again, Trina? We're recording?
Yes, all set. Yep.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you. We'll now move into new business. Starting with an amendment to an agreement with Tillamook County 911. And I would ask Mark Dunmeyer to join us at the table. Ta-da!
There he
Floor
is.
is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we have an agreement with Tillamook County for 911 emergency communication services for the residents of Tillamook County if there were a failure in the dam at McGuire on the Stucker River. So that agreement calls for the option the county could increase that annually by in the contract, it states the Portland CPI index, which was discontinued in 2018. And so this year we paid, it was implemented $1,000. We paid that each year. This year they requested to do an increase, but without an index, we decided that we really needed to use the best replacement, which is the West Region Index. And so we've conferred with them and based on that index, the annual index, calendar year index would result in a 8.05% increase. $1,080.05 would be the amount. So so the amendment would replace the language in the agreement in section 3 that provides all that information on the Portland CPI and replace it with what's in the amendment, which would move us to the West Region Index, and then that will work going forward. So
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Dunmeyer? Not hearing any, I would ask that our legal counsel read our resolution.
So a resolution by title is resolution number 2023-8, a resolution by the city of McMinnville acting by and through its Water and Light Commission, approving amendment number 1 to the emergency system response agreement with the Tillamook County Emergency Communications District. That's 2023-8.
May I have a motion?
So
to
moved.
Have a motion from Commissioner Gormley in a second.
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Christensen, and we'd like to poll the commission, please.
Yes, Mayor Dropkin,
Aye.
Commissioner Gormley,
I.
Commissioner Christensen,
Aye.
Commissioner Tate.
Aye.
Thank you. Resolution number, the resolution is passed and accepted unanimously.
So maybe does everyone know what this system is? That we actually have a separate system from,
I think
I
you
do
should
now.
explain.
Like, yeah, I
No,
wondered
you read about
before.
it?
no, I
Yeah,
mean,
I did read
it's
about it.
actually a separate alert system.
Yeah.
And it's the
That's Tucket Valley River.
yes,
Yeah.
canyon, and so there's actually I guess there are
Sorry.
poles with sirens on them.
Yeah.
So there is an emergency in case there's ever a dam failure.
This was a big negotiation item with us trying to get this approved
That was
to get our dam permit. And, yeah.
So just, I
Yeah.
don't know, I didn't know
Yeah.
if you knew or not.
No, at first I
read
was
it.
trying to figure out how we were making all those alarms work, but then I figured out, fine, I mean, after reading, then I
Okay,
learned about all that. So
so just
Great.
little info.
someday I'll ask a question about what would that look like if that actually happened, but we don't have to do that here.
Okay.
Just curious.
Next, we're going to go into our surplus real property discussion, and I would turn this over to our general counsel, Sam Justice, and our general manager, John Leeds.
All right, so I can start a little bit with it. So you see in the packet, there's a memorandum. This is actually a memorandum in part that was produced probably 6 months ago. discussing the history of the Miller property and the Wagaman property. The Miller property is across the street along Riverside Drive, Marsh Lane. I was refreshing my information about this, got a question before the meeting about it, but it's 27 acres. There is, of that, there's 6 acres in the floodplain. There's 21 acres of usable land. About 15 acres of it is currently under a farm lease. As you know, we currently had it valued. That material has been shared with you, isn't public information this time. That's that property. We also have the Wagman property, which is below the facility. The entire property is about 60 acres. A little over 20 acres of that is under a lease, kind of a long-term lease to the city, which makes up most of the upper parking of Joe Dancer Park, most of the cross street, the extension Marsh Lane, includes probably half of the soccer fields, and also includes the wetlands, the wetland area down below the sort of the farm field here. I think that was introduced in 2002 as actually a mitigation measure that the city put in response to something else. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there was an offset for some.
Yeah, it was a
other
mitigation
wetlands.
for something
So
else.
it's a wetlands mitigation. right?
Yes. Or some,
It's
for-
Was it the stuff over in Chehalem?
That was us.
yeah,
This was related to the city, and I don't know.
yeah, I don't
exactly what it
remember.
was.
I don't know. So in any event, so the discussion today with the commission is about really the status of the property, whether the property is going to be something that the commission wants to consider essentially surplusing. I use the term surplus, but really if the commission were to want to sell the property, there is a process that the city council adopted in 1989 for property within the jurisdiction of the commission, which these two properties are, both of them. And so what would be required by the process established by the city council would be to go through a process of looking at inventory of water and light properties, look at building plans for our properties, do an evaluation of whether indeed that is in fact a surplus property, make some findings in that regard. Also, as you saw from the memo, there's additional findings that are required, really relating to the impact on our land inventory, our system development, our cash flow. It also asks us to make findings about kind of general economic impact. And finally, there is a requirement that the commission is to consider sort of impact to the city as a whole in making a decision. As just quoting from the rule, as a reasonable, prudent business person seeking to protect the short and long range future of the water and light system as it relates to McMinnville. That's what the commission should be doing. If the commission finds that it's appropriate to dispose of the property and finds a buyer, any buyer or any sale would have to go through an approval process to the city council. It also requires that there be a evaluation, and we, as you've seen, we've taken steps to try to figure out, what's a reasonable evaluation. We have, I think it's been in the public record, we have had at least one party approach the commission with interest in acquiring the property, so there is interest out there. The process, this process for sale, there was established by the city council. It's under the statute, under state law, cities have to follow either kind of a public hearing process to sell property, or city councils can establish an alternate process, and that's what you see here in what I summarize in the memo.
So
Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself.
yeah, so for clarification, what is the process to determine? So it sounds like the city council would approve the sale,
Right.
but what is the process in advance of that the Water and Light Commission needs to be aware of regarding the city? In other words, I would not want to bring something before the city council for consideration as a sale document and not have had some engagement with the city council that this was the process that we.
Well, I think what the process established in 1989 seeks is it first seeks a recommendation from the Water and Light Commission. So I
To
think
the city council.
to the city council. So it doesn't mean you can't have a conversation or the general manager can't have an informal conversation with city management
Okay.
about this in sort of preliminary vein. I mean, there's nothing stopping the commission from having discussions or having staff have discussions with the city about it. But the formalized process, what you'd have to do if you actually wanted to go through a process of sale would be to make findings in a public meeting that addresses the issues that are raised by the rule. And I sort of summarize that as a surplusing process, but you should be evaluating what properties do we have, what needs do we have, what's that going to do to our future plans for development, expansion, extension of the system. And if after looking at that, you all make a determination that the best course is to dispose of the property, then if you have a potential buyer and you've established through, for example, appraisal, a fair price, and if you can reach a deal, then that proposal with those findings can be presented to the city council for approval. And that's the process that's been used in the past.
So can I recap just to make
Sure.
sure I understand what you're saying? So if Water and Light wants to continue informal conversations with the city about possible use of this land, but not necessarily put the land on the open market, that can happen without any action from the commission. However, if the commission wants to put the property up for sale, agnostic as to the future use of it, whether it's a private enterprise or city use, etc., then that is when we would initiate this surplusing process that was established in '89.
Well, and I'll kind of restate back to you. I think what a preliminary question maybe is, and this is where there is sort of a chicken and egg thing, but is this a consideration? Is this a road the commission wants to go down? Does the commission want to have staff come back to the commission with information about, is it really a surplus property? Is it, because you'll need to examine that. I mean, I think the rule that the city council established asks you to make essentially factual findings. And to make factual findings, you need information. It isn't just,
No matter who the end user might be.
whoever the end user is. Yeah, if you want to use that process.
And would it be the same if there, does it matter what the net amount of land is? For instance, if there was any land exchange that happened as opposed to a sale, does it still need to go through that process?
The rule provides for both sales and exchanges. So in fact, the first use of the rule was with Willamette Industries in '89 for an exchange of watershed property.
But you still have to go through the surplusing process.
Yes. And I think that was actually what it was designed for. I think it was in '89, it was written in anticipation of this trade of property with Willamette Industries in the watershed. And it's been used again. It was used in the case with the sale of the Irvine Street generation station. That was probably, and there was a small amount of property sold to a developer that Water and Light used or had for some reason that was used again. So it was used again in roughly in the early 90s for the Irvine property, and then in 2004 for a small amount of property near a residential subdivision.
So I think we've been talking about this property and sort of getting our arms wrapped around its potential, whatever that might mean, and however that is defined. What is the decision-making process that we need to make, that we need to be thinking about as a commission to
Is this,
give direction?
in my opinion, do we have a use for this property? Is this a property that in the reasonable discretion of the commission has a use for the Water or Light division? It's actually an asset of the Water division. It's held by the Water division. So is it an asset that the water division needs? I mean, it doesn't have to be tomorrow. But in the reasonable future, some point.
So the sale of the property having to be held as an asset in the water division, that money then would be held in the water division. For purposes defined as,
It goes into reserves and could be used for things in the water.
Right, yeah, right now, the only income off the property, there's a farm lease, the farm lease, the income out of the farm lease, which is only something along, $3,500 a year. Goes to the water division, because these are assets of the water division.
I think. Everybody knows how I feel about this property. I think I would like us to be intentional about this asset and really understand what it means, both from a sale perspective or an exchange, whatever the transaction is. To me, that's not the important piece. The important piece is understanding its value to the enterprise and understanding if there's opportunity there. And then I as a commissioner would like to see that. And I know that we're exploring a lot of different ways that we can sort of look at. I consider that a revenue option, right? But I think we talk a lot about this, but we don't have the real information in front of us to make intelligent decisions. I mean, I would be in favor of continuing down this road and supporting John and team to sort of give us a time frame or how that might work. But that's just my, from my perspective.
Sure. And what about you, Commissioner Tate?
I feel similar. I mean, I think I felt like we've been waiting for this place in the sand to get a valuation, which has now been done. And so, is in that process. And so now that we have some better idea of what we're looking at, and I'm supportive. And I mean, reading what Sam put together. I mean, obviously we're obligated to do that.
And one of the things that I would want the commission to consider too is the difference between buildable land and other land. So there's a different, in my mind, there's a different value there. So if it's wetlands, that is that's something to think about when you look at the value of a site, right? What's buildable and what are wetlands. And so I would want us to make sure that we were looking at it as pieces of that as opposed to just it's one big site. So that's sort of sorry to.
And Commissioner Gormley, your thoughts on the process?
Well, just to give you a little history of why we bought the property. It was to protect this brand new building we had built from initially a bunch of apartments being built. And beyond that, it was just to try and have control over that property to make sure whatever happened to it would be amenable to us here. And also it was looking backwards at how many places we had occupied, finally got us all together in one building. And would this serve us for 25 or 30 years, or would we possibly need to expand at some point in time and do that? So it was land banking in a selfish way because we had the capital to do it. And me, in my selfish way, I think we never had the money to really build a community center. We settled on buying an old armory that we raised some money to do it, put a lot of money into it, but it's still a building that, even though it has a bunch of steel in it, first earthquake comes along, we might have a bunch of steel sitting there and the rocks all down. I just think long-range planning, envisioning for the city that this is such an ideal opportunity to have, the city be next door to us with City Hall and some of the operational things. And this is the collective, this is a center of governance in McMinnville. And, we're part of that in my mind. And maybe they only takes a part of it and the rest of it can be being surplus to sell somebody else. But I really am very concerned. This is us way down here. I mean, this is our backyard, so to speak, as a community dancer park, and thousands of people that are there doing things daily and stuff. And so anyway, I'm very selfish about that, and that's me. And I'm only one vote and I get voted out. Does that happen?
Well, I think that actually the pathway is the same from what I understand. I'm also interested in it for the use of the city primarily and not, I don't have as much interest in it in terms of, you know, injecting cash into the water division, for instance, as a one-time deal, but what I'm understanding is the process is the same for getting this property to a future use that could benefit the city as a whole. Also, with us going through facilities planning and without that facilities planning jumping the street, it gives me some confidence of moving in that direction, that it's not, that land isn't specifically needed for this entity, that it's reasonable to consider it. My highest use or form would also be for the city. So I'd be in favor of ensuing in this process with that in mind, understanding that that could also open up for future commissions the possibility of doing another use with it, and that there's some theoretical risk, but in order to, if the city were to have the opportunity to acquire the property in any way, we would need to go through this process regardless.
So
That's correct. Right?
if I can add, one of my thoughts, and again, visions, was that, and I've talked to John about this for a lot of years, that the city wouldn't buy it. We would somehow work out a transaction that take care of the city because it didn't have the cash to do it. But at the time, we were visioning transmission line and all that, a treatment facility and stuff. And I talked about, you know, exchanging some airport property, but evidently goes back to something to do with the way that the funds came or something like that. But I mean,
But
there's other,
we're thinking of another way, so.
yeah.
You might even want to talk a little bit about what you're thinking about for the first joint meeting.
Yeah, so, you know, as part of the work that we did with BDS planning, the city council and the Water and Light Commission, we agreed, although our packet says no agreements were come to, we generally agreed that we would do this set of things, that our general managers would not only meet, but exchange meeting times with both bodies, et cetera. And one of the things we agreed upon were these joint meetings. And so the agendas for the first two of those joint meetings have essentially been set with clarity to come. But the very first one is going to be a properties evaluation. So it's kind of both entities coming up with maps and looking at everybody's maps and kind of getting a better understanding, making sure both bodies understand the framework and the layout of how we physically exist in this space together. The second one will be on emergency planning. And so as part of that, and our general manager and I have discussed this as well, are other potential properties that the city currently owns that might be available for exchange that specifically would meet future water and light needs, while that property could potentially be serving future city needs. So trying to keep both entities whole, essentially.
Good for you. Good for you.
So I'm generally hearing, and I don't think you're opposing moving the process, you just want a very specific outcome. But I don't want to put words in your mouth.
No, I'm not selfish enough to say I want. I'm hoping. But the process, I mean, hey, I was part of helping develop that process and
And we have to
use it
go
a
through
bunch.
that no matter what the outcome.
And I have no issue with that.
But so what I'm, and this is, you know, what I'm hearing is the commission wants us to continue exploring these paths.
And you're hearing from at least two commissioners that really specifically want you to continue conversations with the city with that as an intended outcome.
And I want to be clear. I'm not saying that I have an outcome in mind.
Right.
What I want to make sure that we do is that we know what that property is and the process in which we would exchange or sell the
Right.
property. That's the frustration that I felt when someone came before us. We were not unified, nor did we have understanding about that property. And we wasted a lot of a private business's time in coming to this before this body. So I'm not defining the outcome. I want to be assured of the process, that we understand it, and that we have the information to make good decisions. And whoever the property becomes, whoever's the owner, if we continue to be the owner or other, that to me is the end game, but we don't have the information in front of us, nor do we really have clarity about how long this process would take. I think we just need to set the stage so that we can make good decisions when the time comes.
And I'm not sure we're ready for the process yet. I think there's other conversations that need to have.
And that's fine, as long as we're moving forward.
Right.
My perception of how the 1989 process was established and how it's been used in the past has been, while I kind of say there's sort of a chicken and egg thing going on, it's generally operates, frankly, as a private sale. The check on it is the appraisal, the findings of the commission, and the final approval of the city council, which all has to be done in the public meeting. So it isn't hidden from the public. So everyone knows out front that property is being exchanged with Lyman Industries, or that this particular, winery is buying the old generator plant, or whatever it is. It's out in the open.
Yes.
So I think what wouldn't surprise me is if we identified a purchaser or a tradee.
Right.
And then we would say, okay, we have this potential purchaser who's engaged with us, saying they're interested, and they kind of know what they're looking at in terms of it's going to cost what it costs. Because we're kind of locked into a price. You got I don't know the
Right,
but you got an appraisal, right? So you have to have a factual basis to get
Yes.
the price. And then you go through the process. The commission is supposed to go through a process of really examining, are we giving up something we need?
Right, so
Right.
properties as a whole, not only this property.
Well,
Yes.
whatever we're selling, whatever we're.
We have to do a needs assessment
Needs
before we can
assessment,
make a
right.
decision about that particular property.
But that could all be done, that could all be done sort of as a stew. I mean, it can be kind of done at the same, if you got, like I said, in the past, it's kind of operated as a private sale. I think we knew Willamette Industries, it wasn't going to be sold to anybody. We weren't trading with anybody except Willamette Industries. There wasn't anybody else out there to trade with. So, but still, the commission had to go through a process of needs assessment. Are we getting good value? Are we,
But,
So do
but
we feel that maybe
all-
we're putting the cart before the horse until some preliminary conversations have occurred with a potential?
well, I think we're working on those. So I think
Okay.
the question
We can
really
do both.
is, yeah, we can,
Okay,
the question really is the commission comfortable with us continuing to proceed down this potential option?
with the city.
Yes.
I'm not opposed to it,
Yeah, and then when we get to that point, we would come back with the
because we have to
necessary.
have findings,
Right,
so we're
we'll
gonna
have
go
to-
through the due diligence of, is this the right path to move
Yeah.
forward?
But
And
We've got a lot of work to do before we.
and at some point it has to go to the city council.
Yeah.
For that, essentially.
And we have to have findings at that point.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
Okay,
so.
yeah.
That's what we're trying to get to is to continue working on this.
I think I would 100% support that.
Okay,
Okay.
I think we have the direction we need. I don't think we need any formalities.
Thank you.
Any additional general manager comments?
No, I think I've given enough.
Any additional commissioner comments? Has everybody had a chance to review the financials? Any questions?
So the financials are not in the packet this time.
No, that's
but,
right.
But
company
they had
was
the
the-
charts.
That's right.
So. Are they done for me yet? Or are you close?
So we have the financials done, monthly investment for so that will get them next week, so.
Next meeting.
we could-
Well, we'll probably send it out before then, so you have it before the next meeting.
Okay, through this system,
Yeah,
so it'll be in the documents.
it'll be in the documents regardless, but we may send it out earlier.
Okay,
Commissioner Gormley?
I forget where I saw there was a graph that had to do with the CPA, was it the auditors? I looked at. Is it this one? It showed,
Moss Adam.
yeah, they showed, it was a yellow, it was a colored.
It was part of the consent agenda.
Yeah, that's it, I
Yeah.
think.
And
It was
there's
approving the billing. or
Oh,
something.
that was, no, it was the engagement letter.
Oh, yeah, okay.
engagement letter, yeah.
So just help me understand the 1/20/23 or 1/30/23. We have already contracted for the 23, 24, and 25 years.
First 3 years, right?
Okay, and did we have discussion over why it jumped? So,
We
We
did.
okay, I thought we did, but I did been.
I
It just
looked
brought
back
up.
at our notes, but he could. He's the expert.
Yeah.
I just read the minutes.
I don't want to belabor this, but I'm just,
The minutes. from
Okay.
Last year. So.
Yeah, so we actually had Keith respond. Keith is the partner in charge of our audit. We asked him that question directly because we had some sticker shock. I actually had been to a conference just before.
I think you
and there
mentioned.
was all kinds of issues being
Yeah.
discussed. There was actually a session at the conference at the government finance
I
officer
remember
conference
that now.
about
Lack of staff, lack of being able to get people.
yeah, and
I-
municipal auditors actually getting out of the business, some retiring.
This brings it all back. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah,
So this was.
lack of competition. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go into executive session to consider information and records that are exempt from public disclosure under ORS 192.34523 relating to information revealing security measures to protect information processing, and we'll come out of that executive session only to adjourn. So anybody?
You get the door, Marcy.
Thank you.
I don't think we have any press in the meeting, so. there's no-
We don't, and we don't have any action items, so I don't believe we will come back live on YouTube or reopen the meeting.
So we're not officially adjourning, but for the sake of our
Yes.
YouTubers, we're essentially adjourned.
Yes.
5:30 and not even leftover pizza from the last meeting.
That's true.
There might be some
Well,
stuff.
5:27, I think.